Gifty Immanuel, you are a Virologist Director Medical Services at Synergia Foundation, Bangalore. You seem to believe that all this focus on vaccines, this fast forwarding of vaccines is actually dangerous. You want to give us some cautionary signals, is it?
Definitely. Rajdeep, thanks for having me on the show. To begin with, the amazing vaccine metrics are coming out, 95%, 94, 92, and values which are out of this world. I'm really happy, but this should be not euphoria. It should be really translating into clinical success. To begin with, the mRNA is a molecule which goes into the human body and presents the antigen to the immune system, and our immune system produces antibody against this particular antigens or the virus component. But mRNA by itself, innately, it's a highly fragile molecule. That is why it's stored at minus 70 degrees. And when it's injected into the body, it's quite likely that mRNA could be disrupted before it enters the cell. And what we are seeing as a very high immune reaction could be a non-specific inflammatory reaction, which could be understood as vaccine-induced immunity. There is a little difference between both of them. So this is basically a failed technology as far as cytomegalovirus and influenza are concerned. They were tried before. It is not a proven methodology. Still, it has been accepted in the UK, but we do not know what are the long-term side effects or the long-term efficacy to begin with of this vaccine.
So are you telling me that you don't go along with this 95% efficacy figures? In the case of Moderna, talk of 100% for severely affected COVID patients? You believe that you need to press the pause button?
Yes, I'm only saying in science you need to evaluate and constantly re-evaluate even if you get positive results, if it's an artifact or a real result. In the sense, this kind of results can come even if there is a non-specific inflammatory reaction. Even if you inject any kind of protein, there will be an inflammatory reaction, and that can show kind of rapid response. But does it clinically protect the patient from acquiring COVID is the big question. So
that's the question I want. That's the question I want to ask you, Dr. Reddy, because there are concerns. A, how long will the immunity last? Even if I get vaccinated with the Pfizer mRNA vaccine, or indeed with Oxford AstraZeneca, as and when it gets approved, how long will the immunity last is one of the concerns. And as is being suggested there by Dr. Gillies, that is there a concern at all that perhaps we are rushing through with these vaccines?
Firstly, Rajdeep, while the previous attempts at mRNA vaccines were not very successful because of the fragility of the mRNA once introduced into the body, recent techniques have actually ensured that the mRNA can actually be safely introduced and can produce, before the human body cells break it down, an immune response, at least in terms of getting the protein synthesized. Because the purpose of mRNA is to instruct the other cellular constituents, the ribosomes, to produce a particular protein, in this case, the spike protein. And that job seems to have been done well with the more modern techniques that have actually improved upon the earlier techniques. But even in the trials, it's not just the immunogenicity that's being assessed. It is actually the number of people who are demonstrating infection in the immunized group versus the non-immunized group. That is the clinical outcome that is being assessed. So to that extent, I think the regulators have checked not just the mechanistic pathway of immunogenicity, but the clinical outcome, and they're quite convinced that this has succeeded.
But what the regulator cannot, with due regard, doctor, what presumably the regulator cannot say at this stage is how long will the immunity last?
Sure, certainly. No, that is not really known. The antibodies themselves seem to be disappearing in about 3 months. There is some evidence that the T-cell immunity may last 6 months or longer. We do not know. The answers are still not there. But the idea here is that if you can protect the vulnerable, and the UK is actually going in first for the care homes, who are at great risk, the elderly. And secondly, if you can actually disrupt the chain of transmission, even a 6-month immunity may be able to do that in such a fast-spreading infection. But certainly this may not be the only way in which this pandemic will end. But it may be one method of trying to get control at this stage.
You know, because